first off, if you're here, shoot us a comment and we want to see if we can see the comments in the live today. We weren't able to last week, so we would like to be able to respond to your comments in real time. So comment, let us know like where you're watching from, what you're doing today, anything like that. Even just say hi, and we'll see if we can see them.
And today we are doing a demonstration on how to solder a backplate onto a stamping from an impression die. So this is a question we get asked a lot about in the Facebook group. So we wanted to just demonstrate how I would do it, and then Annie will tell us if she does it a totally different way. I don't know. We didn't
Entirely possible.
But yeah, I have a couple of samples here. These actually were all made by Annie. And so they're all examples of impression dies that have been soldered in some way, shape, or form to a backplate. So this one Annie made, and she stamped out two different impressions from two different impression dies. Mm-hmm. There's this one on top here, and then this backplate with that like fancy edge is a completely different design. And she just soldered this, what is that, like an octagon shape to this back piece. Mm-hmm. And so I think probably the most common question we get asked when people are wanting to do this type of thing is about the air vent hole. Like, do you have to have it? How big does it have to be? How many holes do you have to have? All those things. So you may or may not be aware of this, but it is best practice when soldering a hollow form, which this would be considered a hollow form, any two pieces of metal that form like a hollow space in between them.
Yes. Regardless of how deep or how shallow.
Yes. Anytime that you're doing that, it's best practice to have a hole somewhere in the design for air to escape. And there's a few reasons for that. The main reason is that anytime you reheat the piece back up, the air inside that cavity will expand, and it can turn the piece of jewelry into a little tiny bomb, basically. Because that air expands, there's nowhere for it to go if there's not an escape route. And so it literally can shoot across the room, and you don't want red hot metal shooting anywhere.
No.
That's not a good thing. So that is why that's a best practice. And we're going to talk a little bit more about it today. But anyways, on this particular example, Annie didn't drill a hole, but what she did was just like, because this back plate wasn't fully flat, the design kind of makes some areas higher and some lower. She soldered this piece down to the back plate, but there are gaps all the way around the edge.
Yeah. So it's soldered onto like the raised portion of that back plate. Oh, you can actually see a hole right there. So that was like a strategic.
It's soldered onto like this ledge, but there's low spots where air is able to escape. So she didn't have to like drill a specific hole in this example. Right. You can cut decorative holes. It doesn't have to just be a drill hole. So in this little tie tack pin that Annie made, she used
a silhouette die.
A silhouette die to make this little cloud shape, and then soldered it to a patterned piece of metal that was flat. And she used some of the design in the pattern of the metal to remove selected areas, and that is
it looks really intentional.
Yes, and it's more decorative than just a drilled hole. It's part of the design, but it also functions as the escape route for that air.
Yeah. So it doesn't just have to be a hole, just a round hole.
So this is also a pendant made from an impression die, and it's soldered to a flat sheet. And she, instead of, again, just drilling a hole, she cut out a hole that mimics a shape in the design. So it's following that kind of teardrop shaped design theme, and it's allowing access into this area. It allows air to escape. It makes the piece a little lighter. It reduces the cost a little bit because she's able to retain more of that silver. And then she also sawed a little tab here where she could drill a hole for a bail or a jump ring or whatever. So think about how on your backplate you can add tabs for, functionality, but also what kind of shape hole you want to make in your piece. Here's another example that Annie made. This is obviously an impression on the front, and then on the back she does have just a drilled hole, but instead of leaving it just a drilled hole, she decorated it even further, tying it into the design on the front, that flower design, by just carving out and grinding some little petals.
Turn it 180 degrees, so the flower's pointing toward me.
This flower?
There, yeah.
Okay, sorry, math. 180 degrees is more than I can handle while doing a live demo.
Yeah, so
you can't talk and think at the same time, Annie.
I should know.
I'm like, no, I can't do that. Okay.
So I just used a cylindrical burr. A cylinder burr. I don't know if we have one. Yeah.
Like this.
Yep. And made just some ground little petals to mimic the design on the front.
So just some really simple ways to kind of dress up the design so it's not just like this ugly, weird, random hole in the back of your piece. And then another thing you could do is, like on this piece, for example, Annie could have drilled a hole in the center of each of these flowers and then set, put a little stone setting on the top of each one, a little bezel or a little tube setting. And then once you set the stone, the hole is hidden by the stone.
Right.
But you still have that like escape vent if the piece ever is reheated. So that's another way you can do it. A lot of times you can disguise air vents under a stone setting. All right, so today I have 2 examples that I'm going to demonstrate on. This is one of the dies in our wilderness spotlight that's available right now. I really like it. It's just, to me, it looks kind of like a deserty landscape, very much like Western United States landscape, I think, but I'm biased because that's where I live. It really could be anywhere. It's just like some hills. It's a very shallow design, so you can see I've got a lot of flat space on the back, but there is going to be open areas where air is going to be trapped. So technically this is still considered a hollow form. It's not as deep as some of these other examples that we looked at. And you might think, oh, there's not a lot of air that's going to get trapped in there. And that's true. So on this one, I am not going to drill a hole and have an air vent. And that is like breaking the best practice rule. You really do want to have that. And it's fine. Nothing bad is going to happen when I'm initially soldering this down.
Yep.
The only time that something bad potentially could happen is if someone goes back in and reheats this piece up after it has been soldered closed. Yeah. That's when that air in there expands and it has nowhere to go.
Yeah. So the issue with soldering without an air vent is not an issue during the initial soldering.
Yes.
So it's like
it's in any subsequent heatings.
Yeah. Which I think is a little confusing. I don't know that most people, because you hear like don't solder, don't solder without an air vent. It's not going to be as you're doing the initial soldering. It's going to be like if you're adding a bale or
when it's dangerous.
Yes.
That being said, it actually is fairly hard to solder something with a big space in the middle down to a flat piece because there's still air in there that wants to escape. So this piece is going to kind of like hover a little bit and want to like pop up a little bit. Yeah, it's going to want to kind of like ripple on the surface of this back plate as you're trying to heat it and get it soldered because that air is needing to escape. So it is more challenging to solder something like this without an air vent. So I'm going to do this example and I'm going to solder down this deeper concho. This die is not available currently, but I just wanted to do an example of something a bit deeper with a lot more airspace. And in this one, I am going to drill a hole. So I could solder it, I could drill a little hole, which is what I'm going to do, or I could do something like this where I've cut a larger hole in the back, something like you saw on some more of Annie's samples. And that shape really mimics the shape of the concho. It reduces the weight a little bit, but it looks very finished and intentional. So I could do something like that. Or what I'm actually gonna do is I'm gonna drill a hole right in the middle and the top, and I could solder a tube setting or something in there, and that'll give me my air vent, and I'm just gonna solder it completely flat to this back piece.
Yeah.
So we'll drill that hole really quick, and then we'll go over to the soldering station and we'll solder both of these examples.
Cool. I don't know if anyone is commenting. I've gone through like the settings. It says live chat is on. We should be able to see it, but we cannot. So I'm sorry. We'll figure this out
It's
sometime.
always something.
Yeah. So sorry if you're commenting and we can't see it.
We're also millennials, so it could just be us.
Yes.
All right, so I'm just gonna drill a hole in the top center of this concho design. And then I could solder a tube setting or something over that area so it would be hidden. I'm not gonna do that for the demonstration. I'm just gonna solder it to the back plate. But this is enough to allow air to escape, and we'll be fine.
Let's talk a little bit about getting the piece flush.
Oh yeah, I forgot.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's why
So,
we have two brains.
Yes, one of the most important parts of this process where you're soldering a piece to a flat back plate is for soldering to work well and be successful, you really need to have a really good, nice, tight fit. So your pieces need to be flat where they meet each other, or they need to, conform to the same shape. In this case, it's a flat back, so we want the lip of this piece that's being soldered down here, we want it nice and flat. So I don't know how well you can see, but I've sanded that edge so there's a nice flat rim all the way around.
I'm just gonna kind of tilt it a little bit. There we go. So you can see that rim that's getting highlighted, really nice and flat.
And I like to do that on this thing that you've probably seen us show before. It's a diamond
Knife sharpener
from Harbor Freight. It's very classy. I think it's like $11 or somewhere around there. But it's got four-sided diamond sanding areas in different grits, and it just works really nicely for like sanding things flat like this. It's slightly more aggressive, I think, than sandpaper, just a little bit faster,
and it doesn't wear down like abrasive paper.
So you could just use sandpaper to sand these flat if that's all you have, but this is perfectly flat and it holds up to sanding many times.
You can use it wet.
Yeah. And so this piece, you can see I had to sand quite a bit further because there's more surface area that's going to come into contact with my back plate. So this one I've got flat areas here and then all the way around the lip. And then this one, I just have that lip flat. But I've done that step. Thanks for reminding me to talk about it, Annie. On both of these pieces. And that's going to be essential for being successful when you're soldering. That's like the most important part of all of this.
And if you've done it to like the piece that you're going to solder on top and it's still not fitting flush, it could be your back plate is not perfectly flat.
Yeah. So sometimes you have to sand these flat, or you need to go over to the anvil with a nylon mallet or something and hammer it really flat. But these are good to go. So we're going to go over to the soldering station.
I apologize if it's jerky walking over here. I sprained my ankle earlier this week. It's getting better, but a little hobbly still.
So we'll do this one first, and then we'll do the copper one.
Tying hair back so we don't get yelled at.
And so I don't light my hair on fire.
Dude, also like that.
And got my chunky, really nasty flux here. I'm going to flux both pieces. And if you've ever learned how to sweat solder, this is basically how I'm treating this one. So I'm gonna flow solder on the back of the top piece first, this piece, and then I'll put it on top of this piece and reheat until the solder reflows.
And it doesn't matter what type of solder, like what grade of solder you use. It'll just depend on where in your process of building your specific piece that you're doing this hollow soldering.
Yeah, that is true. That being said, I always use hard, even if I'm not going to do any more soldering. It's the closest color match to silver. It's the highest silver content. It's less prone to pitting than the lower temp solders. So I'm
hard solder all the way.
Just making sure I have plenty of little pieces here to work with. Let me get my torch lit.
It's just an acetylene air. This torch.
And then I'm just gonna place some solder chips along the back ledge. And once I get them all placed, then I will heat the piece until these all flow.
And the flux, gets a little sticky when you're heating it, so it can help hold those in place. This is from, we're using sheet solder, which is, it works the same way as if you're using wire. But I'm a convert to the sheet solder. Doesn't roll away like the wire does.
I'm a wire solder person. Like if I buy solder, I buy wire form, and then I just roll it flat in my rolling mill. I don't know why. Probably because that's what I learned with, and I just am used to it. Yeah. All right, so you can see I have more than the amount of solder that I need. I've got plenty. But with this type of process, I like to err on the side of too much solder rather than not enough. Because once you get this soldered down to here, even if it's only partially soldered, adding more solder to it is more difficult.
Yep.
It's a lot easier if you just get it now. You kind of want this to be a one and done thing.
Get the whole thing covered with solder where it's been sanded flat.
Okay, so my solder flowed. Now I'm going to, and if this was dirty, it's fine. It's still pretty clean. If this was dirty, I would stop and go pickle this. Because it's only going to cause me problems if it's too dirty to solder onto this back piece. This is clean enough, and I've got more flux on here, so I'm going to go ahead and place this on top of here. But you would want to take the extra time to go and pickle that if it was really dirty.
It's also a good idea to leave your backplate larger than the piece that you're soldering on top so that you can trim it after the fact. Yeah. It makes it easier. You don't have to be as precise with your placement when you're placing the piece on top.
And a lot of times when you're sweat soldering, especially without an air vent like this, is the piece kind of floats and skids on the surface. And I don't want it to move off the plate, so add extra metal and give yourself a lip.
Yeah.
And then I'm just going to heat this until I see this thin silver solder flow line around the outside edge, and I want to see that all the way around. And I'm placing the solder on top just so it doesn't move on me. Okay, so I'm seeing the solder flow, I think. I'm gonna turn it and just make sure it's flowing all the way around. I don't know if you guys can see that. it's showing up on camera?
Sort of.
Okay.
Not a lot, but
And I'm putting a little bit of pressure with the tweezers, but you don't want to put a lot of pressure on silver when it's being heated because it can actually fracture.
Yep.
If you put pressure on it while it's hot. So this side looks good. I'm just gonna kind of, okay, so I've got a little lift over here. I'm gonna heat and just kind of press.
I'm going to zoom out just so that you can kind of see she's down pretty much at eye level so that she can really see what's going on with that join.
All right, so
Pretty
it's
good.
soldered all the way around except right here I have a couple small gaps. So I'm gonna heat it one more time and just try to push down in those areas. But I probably actually could have used more solder than I have here.
And
I was probably a little skimpy on my solder. What were you gonna say, Annie?
Oh, I was like, you could add more if you needed
could.
to, but
I probably will have to. I'm trying to avoid it because if I add more, it's likely to kind of
Yeah.
like jump that edge and flow, and then I'll have cleanup to do. Whereas
I
if
know.
I can get it to flow this way, I won't have any cleanup except like removing the lip.
that's
But it looks like I was a little skimpy with my solder.
Oh, wait. Did it flow? I think it just flowed.
It did flow. Hopefully no other spots opened back up. I think it's so dirty now we're gonna have to just pickle it and take a
And
look.
see.
But if I didn't get an area to flow cleanly, then at this point I would just add more solder and do it again. Now it's covered in pumice.
Sorry, I'm zooming back out, y'all. Yeah, I can't see comments. That makes me really sad.
We've got to figure that out.
So hopefully we're covering any questions that you have.
All right, we're just gonna leave this in the pickle for a couple minutes while I do this copper one. And we're gonna do it almost exactly the same.
Copper just gets so much dirtier, so much faster.
Yeah. I'm gonna be extra generous with my flux on the copper because it gets so dirty. The flux gets exhausted a lot faster.
And if you've watched other lives of ours, you know that I'm a fan of the liquid flux. When I'm doing copper, I'm full paste solder. It just lasts a whole lot longer than the liquid. So I use liquid for silver and then paste flux for copper. And Lynette uses paste flux for everything. So
for almost everything.
There's
the only time I
no
use liquid is if I'm doing like really teeny tiny filigree stuff or chain or like little tiny jump rings.
there's no right or wrong, just different.
I'm a sloppy fluxer. Wow, that laugh felt personal, Amy. You laughed a little too
You're
much.
like, mm-hmm.
You're like, yeah, you are. Oh, come on. I melted a piece of solder to my tweezer tips.
That's why you keep more than one on standby. These are diamond tweezers that she's using. They are pretty cheap. I think
They're like under
less than
$3.
$2. Yeah. I love them. It's another thing that you've shown me that now I can't live without. So just like before, she's adding little pattings of hard solder all around that outside rim that she'd previously sanded flat.
just making sure that I get good coverage all the way around. I don't really want to have to go back and add more solder. It just makes cleanup a little bit trickier. So,
Err on the side of too much.
yeah, you don't want to go crazy, but you want good coverage. Okay, and I'm not worried, you know, it's not like traditional sweat soldering in the sense that I'm covering the whole back of this concho. I'm just worried about getting coverage on that flat lip because that's what's contacting the back plate. So the solder's placed. I'm going to heat now until the solder flows. Turn my torch up a little bit.
Because copper oxidizes so quick, you kind of want to get in, get out as quickly as you can when it comes to soldering.
And this is actually pretty dirty, so I'm going to take the moment to stop and pickle it, and then I'll come back and solder it here. See how black it is? I could probably get this soldered, but it's just going to fight me. It's always better if your metal is clean. So I'm going to
I'm glad that happened, because that's a really smart thing, because I know you get excited, you know.
It's hot, you don't want to have to heat it again, but it's just like, it just causes problems if your metal's not clean. But we can look at this other one now while that pickles for a second. Am I overflowing?
I'm just making sure. Not.
We don't have a drain in this room, so our sink drains into a bucket.
So when the water's running.
Keeping it classy at Potter USA. All right, so that looks good. I have like a clean silver line all the way around, and so my next step would just be to go pierce this out and saw the back plate off.
Yeah.
But I've got, you know, a nice flat back.
But you wouldn't want to reheat this.
No.
Yep. You see our sign? The sink. We came into a disaster one time.
Oh, look at my crazy hair. Annie and I get grumpy when we have to clean up other people's messes.
Yes. Clean up after yourself.
All right, so it's clean now. I'm gonna reflux it. It's mostly clean. Gonna heat up this back plate. Sorry, I'm moving on you.
You're good. I'll follow you.
Flux is kind of pooling together, but as soon as the metal gets hot enough, it'll spread out on the surface.
Yep. Beautiful. Woo, that got me too.
Sorry.
That's good. Okay? Yeah. And so you can see, like,
I've got a lot of flux on here. More than I need. See how slippery that is? You can use binding wire or like the little titanium solder clips. You just never want to put a lot of pressure on something when you're holding it in place because you don't want to, like if it's silver, the silver can fracture.
It's also a good thing. You'll find out really quickly if your soldering block is level.
I don't know if you can see that, but that's what I was talking about, where it's kind of like lifting a little bit to let some of that air.
You can a little bit.
It's not really doing it now, but
where it kind of breathes almost.
Yeah. I haven't seen it flow yet.
Turn it up. Copper is going to require more heat, just because it transfers heat so well. You're going to need a hotter flame to be able to get it all up to soldering temperature at the same time.
Okay. I saw a silver line. Now I'm going to rotate. And I'm just looking for the silver solder line along that edge. I don't know how well you can see that.
I think you can. It's hard to tell if it... Oh no, you can see it.
I think I'm good. I'm gonna pickle it.
Yeah. I can't see questions, but I know people are gonna ask about
Getting the pickle inside?
getting the pickle out from the inside,
Yeah.
removing flux from the inside.
Yeah, so the pickle is what's going to remove the flux from the inside. So you need to let it sit in the pickle long enough that it can get in there and kind of flush that out. And it's going to take a little bit longer than it would normally.
And I don't know if you saw it, but she was kind of shaking it back and forth under the water too, or
Yeah.
the pickle. That kind of helps that pickle get inside that little hole.
Yeah. And then once we're ready to get the pickle out of here, which you absolutely want to do because it will ooze out and like corrode your copper. You'll get like green crusty ooze coming out of your piece if you don't get all the pickle out.
And it can be like days,
Yeah.
weeks later. It's not something that happens right away. You'll have this beautifully finished piece, and then all of a sudden you'll get this green flaky crust from where the pickle found its way out somehow.
Yeah, so I was taught to do that a couple of different ways. Let's look at this first and then I'll...
Sure.
So you can see there's just a really clean solder line all the way around. I don't see any gaps.
Yeah,
I did see, there's one little spot right here where some of the solder came up and over, which is a bummer. So I'll have to do a little cleanup right there. Not the end of the world. It's like barely visible, but I like it when it's perfect.
I want everything to work the way it's supposed to.
Yeah. So the way I was taught to remove pickle from inside a piece like this is to boil baking soda in water and put this in the boiling baking soda water solution, and the baking soda solution will neutralize the pickle inside. And then to take like, what are those needles called? Syringe. Thank you for that word. You can take a syringe and like flush clean or water or baking soda water into that cavity and kind of flush that area out.
That's what I do if, say I have like a small hole, and I really want to make sure that I'm getting all of the baking soda in there to neutralize.
So you can use it to draw the liquid in there out a little bit, and then you can take clean water or baking soda water and force it into that area and just flush it.
And this is just a little pipette or pipette.
See how it's like flushing out? And you just want to do that a few times to really make sure you're getting the acid out.
And you want to do this after you're like
done heating it.
After you're done putting it in pickle, because it's if you're gonna be heating it again and placing it in pickle, it's gonna get pickle in it again.
Yeah, I do want to show you something though. I want you to be careful whenever you have a hollow form and a hole like this, and then you're going back and heating. It turns into a little volcano or a little geyser. So you want to heat slowly if you're going to heat this piece back up, because the liquid inside will just like shoot out. Of course, now if I'm on camera, it will probably see how it's, but sometimes you'll heat it quickly and it'll just geyser out and it could really hurt you.
That was a pretty good
eruption.
Yeah, so just
Anyway,
another
you
safety
get the
thing
idea.
to
Yeah, just heat it
keep in
slowly
mind.
so
Yeah.
you don't volcano your face.
Coming in with the safety tips.
Yeah. Okay, so then my next step for this one and the silver one would just be to saw around the edge, and then do my filing and sanding and all that stuff.
Yeah. I do it the same way.
Oh, okay. I was curious. I was like,
yeah.
I wonder if Annie's gonna say like, "Whoa, that's
No.
Because sometimes Annie and I do things really
Very differently. No, I do it the same way. I use liquid flux for silver. That's really the only difference. So yeah, I know this is a common question, and it's one we've gotten fairly recently, is people asking like, how do I solder an impression die onto a backplate? And so we've covered kind of the key things that you need.
Another question is people always ask about the gauge.
Oh yeah, on backplates.
So there's a huge range of gauges you can use. It's really going to depend on, cost, weight,
Final use of the piece.
use of the piece, size of the piece. If you've got a really large piece, I would not suggest going super thin because really big pieces of metal, when they're heated, they will warp. They won't stay flat.
I think I might be able to show a comparison.
I typically do like 20 or 22 gauge.
Yeah. This one is probably thinner. I filed the edges of this hole, and so what the edge looks like isn't necessarily a representation of the thickness of the metal. This was probably 22 gauge for the backplate, and it's just a very thin backplate for an earring. As opposed to this ring, it needs to be a lot more durable. So I'm pretty sure I used 18. Probably not thicker.
Get knocked around.
Yeah, because it'll get knocked around. It's it's going to be a lot more durable than backing for something like an earring.
And then we also have just a couple of stampings and samples here of things that are available this week as part of the Wilderness Spotlight. So all of these are available this week. There's tons of really cute kind of nature and animal dies that you can check out.
There's this creepy bear.
That bear creeps me out. He's like sneaky smiling at you.
He's up to something.
Yeah, that's a mischievous bear. But he's got really great detail. I mean, all his little fur and everything. It's a really nice detailed die. This one's really cool just because it has a frame around the impression, and then it also includes like the bail. So it has this piece that you can just fold over as the bail. Just really simple.
Yeah, really nice. We have this little mountain, which I pressed yesterday. I think I posted a video in Potter People. It might be a specific mountain. We don't know. But just a really cute stacker ring. Pressed it solid and soldered it to a little band. Could stamp a bunch of these, layer them with like birthstone rings. There's another one. This is one of our current September monthly impression dies.
It's super cool.
It's so neat.
And it actually wasn't as hard to press as I thought. When I looked at it, I was like, oh, that's deep. But it really wasn't that bad to press.
So cool. I love the sort of hammered, it looks like riveted steel.
Looks very medieval to me, like castle.
So yeah, we have our September monthly impression dies, and those are going away at the end of September. Our wilderness or into the wild, I don't remember what we called it, but it's lots of wilderness type dies, impression dies. Those are available on our website, potterusa.com. Through Sunday. And then we have our dies of the day and all of our pancake dies and pattern plates and anything you could want. So I think that's it. I would ask if you have any questions. Can't tell. So
Unfortunately, we're not mind readers.
Right.
But if you have any questions, you can ask them in the Potter USA Facebook group, Potter People. We'll be happy to answer them there, or you can leave a comment on the YouTube and we'll try to answer it later.
Yeah. So hope that helps everybody. Have a good Wednesday.